Benefits Agreement Steering Committee. My name is Samir Sid. I'm a Deputy Administrative Officer for Baltimore County and will be serving as an ex officio member of the Steering Committee. I'll do a quick overview of our agenda for tonight, which will start after I do a quick recap here with introductions from our Steering Committee membership. And I'll do a brief overview of kind of the legislation and the charge of the steering committee itself. We'll then do a review of comments that we've received on the website to date, followed by brief presentations from the Maryland Department of Natural Resources as the owner of Hart-Miller Island, the Baltimore County Department of Environmental Protection and Sustainability on potential improvements to communities in the vicinity of Hart-Miller Island, and finally, from Trade Point Atlantic to discuss the separate environmental regulatory process to approve the Sparrows Point Container Terminal project. We have time allotted for open dialogue amongst the committee members themselves to discuss the work ahead to get to a community benefits agreement, and then we'll conclude with 15 minutes allotted for public comment. Just a few notes about the public comment period. For those who wish to comment publicly, there is a link that's been posted in the chat box that will allow you to sign up to speak. As I just mentioned, we have 15 minutes allotted total. So try to keep your comments brief. We'd ask that they stay at around 90 seconds a person so that we can fit in as much comment as possible. Of course, if we're unable to get to your comment tonight, we have a comment portal set up on our website, which we'll also be going through during the meeting. So please feel free to contact us through that mechanism as well. And last, for those that are commenting, and I'll remind you guys as we get into the public comment period, we'd ask that you identify yourself and any organization or relevant affiliations that you have. So with that, I will jump into our first item, which is a round of introductions from our committee members. And I'll start as Samir Sid. I'm going to be serving as an ex officio member representing Baltimore County, who is a signing party of the Community Benefits Agreement, which is dictated by House Bill 343. And Paul, I'll go to you first to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Shamir. And good evening. Paul Brilski. I chair the Citizens Oversight Committee and also president of Hart-Miller Island, resident of Bowley's Quarters.
Thank you. Brian Hall, do you want to go next? You're muted.
Creek, North Point Creek, and recreational boating in Baltimore County in general.
Thanks, Brian. Frank, how about you next?
I'm Frank Nyhuff. I'm from the Millers Island community, and I'm president of a number of organizations, both community and environmental, including the Chesapeake Bay Association, Chesapeake Bay Environmental Alliance, Back River Conservation Association, Millers Island Improvement Association, Greater Gunpowder Association, among others.
Thanks, Frank. I don't think Gloria Nelson has joined us yet, so we can circle back to her when she's able to hop on. Richard from DNR, why don't you hop on next?
Hello, I'm Richard Ward. I'm the Director of Resource Assessment Service from the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, and here to talk to you and, more importantly, listen to you for what the community wants for community benefits. Thanks.
Thanks, Richard. I think Scott Pappas is out for this evening, so we'll go to Josh Sines next.
You have to talk in there.
Hello, can you hear me? It doesn't work. Hello?
Josh,
hello.
Okay, this is
Hello.
Josh Sines. I'm the president of the Essex Middle River Civic Council.
Thanks, Josh. Fran Taylor?
God, this is motherfucking, I want to scream.
Fran Taylor, president of the North Point Peninsula Council. I'm also a 20-year member of the Hart-Miller Citizens Oversight Committee.
Will you use my phone?
Okay, Sam Weaver.
Friends of Hart-Miller's Island. Essex Community Association, Trade, Marine Trades of Baltimore County, and a dozen other ones, 4 yacht clubs and everything else. So
Thanks, Sam. And then last but not least, of course, Karen Wynn.
Hi, I am the co-founder of Maryland Waterways Foundation. I'm on the Citizen Oversight Committee for Hart-Miller Island, on the Friends of Hart-Miller Island. I'm on the Baltimore County Commission for Environmental Quality, the Marine Trades, a bunch of other stuff, involved with many communities and work with many communities.
Got it. Thank you, Karen. So I'm going to do a quick overview, just kind of recapping the legislation, the charge of this committee, and kind of what is beyond our scope as well. So let me start with just why we're here in general. And in short, we're here because of House Bill 343, which was passed during the state's most recent legislative session. House Bill 343 opens a window for the Maryland Department of the Environment to approve placement of dredged material at or within 5 miles of Hart-Miller Island under the following specific conditions. One deals with the location of dredged material. Dredged material must either be from a local dredging project, or B, within 1 mile of a large redevelopment site. The community benefits agreement, which is kind of the focus of this steering committee. If the qualifying material is within 1 mile of a large redevelopment site, the party seeking to place material at Hart-Miller Island must enter into a community benefits agreement with Baltimore County and must consult with the Hart-Miller Island Citizens Oversight Committee as part of entering into that community benefits agreement. And you'll notice, as part of the composition of this committee, we have several members of the Citizens Oversight Committee represented in our steering committee, and that was part of the intent, is to stay compliant with House Bill 343. The third condition is that there is a requirement of county council approval. So the Baltimore County Council must approve the community benefits agreement related to placement at Hart-Miller Island. And the last but not least important criteria is that the community benefits agreement must be approved on or before December 31st of 2024 in order for MDE to approve placement at Hart-Miller Island. In terms of qualifying projects and kind of the subject of why we're here, based on the provisions in House Bill 343, material generated from the development of the Sparrows Point Container Terminal, which is under the umbrella of Trade Point Atlantic, would qualify as within 1 mile of a large redevelopment site. We've, of course, received indications that Trade Point is interested in placing material at Hart-Miller Island based on under the conditions of House Bill 343. So to explore that potential placement, Trade Point, as the dredging party, and Baltimore County will need to reach an agreement and secure approval of a community benefits agreement before the end of this calendar year. That brings us to the role of this committee. And so, plainly, the role of this committee is to help us set forth what we would want to see in a community benefits agreement in exchange for supporting placement of material at Hart-Miller Island. The community benefits agreement is supported by a sum of money based on the language stated in House Bill 343. And while there's ongoing discussions about the amount, the legislative intent is there for the funding to support identified community benefits in this agreement in exchange for allowing placement at Hart-Miller Island. In terms of what is outside of the scope of this committee, and I think most importantly, our work as a committee is not a substitute for or in lieu of compliance with the many federal, state, and local environmental regulations that will apply to the container terminal project. Trade Point Atlantic is on tonight as one of our presenters, and we'll talk shortly about the separate environmental process that will govern their work and their project. And so with that information out there as a primer, I'm going to kick it off by reading some of the comments received on the website, and then we'll hop into the heart of the meeting agenda. Okay. All right, so I will start with the first email from Molly Hoops, who provided that I am hoping that the crucial salt marsh habitats can be preserved in the north cell of HMI for birds. The second email is from Herbert Wolf. Since we have an opportunity for improvements, I would like to have our storm drain ditch at the end of Wells Avenue piped in. The drainage piping ends before it continues around the wooded area. The open ditch is a mosquito breeding place. Also, the church at the end of Ross Avenue is a food pantry for the community, and improvements in our distribution would be a blessing, i.e. cold and regular storage with kitchen options. I welcome further interest and improvements. Thanks. The next is from Joe Walters. The North Point Edgemere Volunteer Fire Department is starting a campaign for a new fire rescue response vessel and needs financial assistance. We also need a new pier located on the back river side of the peninsula to dock our boat. These two projects would be great and would enhance our response to Hart-Miller Island. Teresa Weinreich provided, I personally don't want the dredging material transported across all these bodies of water to contaminate our waterways even more and the smell from it. I've been a property owner for nearly 44 years here on the eastern Baltimore County waterways, and it has brought a nuisance of bugs from it in the past, and I feel it should be contained to Trade Point. There's plenty of land there to fill in. The county promised us years ago that this would stop, but they continue to want to keep added to this dredging at HMI. Why should the residents of the east side of the county continue to have to put up with this? Maybe check the health records of our residents, because all this disposal throughout the years, do the right thing and keep it on their own land and not transport it in our waterways. And I just comment, I think that's useful feedback. Again, we're exploring an opportunity at this point, but certainly, there's no foregone conclusions here. The next comment is from Keith Taylor. The Sparrows Point North Point Historical Society wants to firmly state our opposition against the proposal for Trade Point Atlantic, Baltimore County, and the state to utilize Hart and Miller Island, our cherished state park, as a site for toxic waste disposal. This proposal sets a perilous precedent that could lead to the exploitation of state parks for profit by other businesses around the country. Our community refuses to allow the degradation of our treasured state park, regardless of financial incentives. Since 2015, we have been advocating for a community benefit agreement. It is time for Trade Point Atlantic, Baltimore County, and the state to step up and demonstrate corporate social responsibility, positively impacting society and the environment. We firmly assert that corporations, counties, and states must operate in ways that enrich society and the environment rather than contribute negatively. We specifically speak for Sparrows Point and Edgemere. We endure the traffic and the noise from racing cars and tractor trailers, the air pollution, the trash dumping on the roads, the increase in crime, the tractor trailers and cars racing down North Point Boulevard while school buses are turning into Edgemere. We've endured 125 years of pollution and wastewater. It is time to demand the motto, you grow, we grow, and hold those responsible for these impacts accountable. It is essential to implement a CBA to address the effects of Trade Point Atlantic has already had on the peninsula, and to ensure that corporate responsibility enhances our society and environment. This beautiful peninsula deserves better. And then to the CBA itself, our community heritage deserves preservation, and we urge an effort to restore it. Trade Point Atlantic has relocated our heritage to the city, and we believe it should be brought back to our community. All neighboring communities have heritage centers, and we believe it's essential that we have one as well to tell our story. Safe routes to schools with the implementation of sidewalks for children to travel to school safely are necessary and should have already been realized through Baltimore County with a federal grant. We strongly advocate for a lower speed limit through Edgemere, along with monitoring by photo, particularly for 25 miles an hour. We believe that Baltimore County Public Schools must acquire the property behind Food Line to expand the impervious surface for Sparrows Point High School. Additionally, obtaining the St. Luke property to alleviate overcrowding and parking issues at the high school is vital. We believe that there's a pressing need for a new middle school. Furthermore, we must support Fort Howard Park to aid the veterans, and we propose transforming it into a state park or a federal park for the benefit of the community. The current state of our property cannot be allowed to persist. the rerouting of trucks from Trade Point Atlantic to ensure the safety of our children is of paramount importance, and they should not be permitted to travel down North Point Boulevard where buses carry children operate. The next email is from Linwood Jackson. Baltimore County Executive, when asked about Turner Station having same type community meeting, he agreed that a meeting shall take place same type as Sparrows Point High School with Walter's Edge, Carnegie Platts community combined. Thanks. Kathy Lambro, stated, in my position as chair of the Conservation Committee of the Baltimore Bird Club, as well as a Baltimore County resident residing close to Hart-Miller Island, I've been working on drafting the Baltimore Bird Club's position paper and ideas for submission to the committee in partnership with Joe Corcoran, president of the Baltimore Bird Club. Both of us are active members of the Hart-Miller Island Friends Committee as well. Baltimore Bird Club and Maryland Ornithologic Society involvement goes back to at least 1983, including bird and other biodiversity studies and counts on the island. One of our members was on the study team that advised the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in preparation of the South Cell Restoration Plan approved in 1998. I appreciate the selection of the original steering committee and have a great deal of respect and appreciation for their service to the community and the expertise that they will bring to this committee. But I think it would be of great benefit to also include a member who has background in ornithology and natural biodiversity as either one member of the committee or two, an official advisor to the committee, having input and to vote in all decisions made by the committee. To that end, I believe Joe Corcoran would be best served to fill this role and would respectfully request that you give it full immediate consideration. I know that he would be most happy to fill this important role in assisting to develop the CBA. Mr. Corcoran has had extensive involvement with Hart-Miller Island in his work with the Friends Group and as president of the Baltimore Bird Club. He's worked closely with and well known to the HMIA Oversight Committee. He's extremely knowledgeable in all things related to birds, their behavior, and habitat, and would provide a depth of knowledge to the committee regarding this subject that would be invaluable in the design of the agreement. I would like to bring this matter up for consideration at tonight's meeting. Thank you for your consideration. And just as a note, we also received a proposal from Mr. Corcoran, and I think we have that proposal. We also have another proposal from the North Point Council, and we're going to take those proposals, and those will inform kind of the drafting process of the community benefits agreement. So that matter will be considered as the committee does its work. From Douglas Selmer, convert mudflats to flooded wetlands starting at Back River Bridge, create a series of wetlands to filter out the pollutants and trash from Herring Run and Stemmers Run, include an automated trash collection system. Take core samples from Back River to evaluate sediments for disposal at Hart-Miller Island, dredging of Sioux Creek, Back River, Muddy Gut, Hog Pen Creek, and Bear Creek. The purpose to make the dredging channels deep enough to allow boat traffic to move and not stir up sediment, and create a wetland at the Back River disposal plant to capture pollutants and sediment from the plant during rain events. The headworks do not adequately work to capture sediment. And last, from Henry Hutton, dredge Sioux Creek to reduce turbidity that will enhance the water quality needed to expand and support healthy SAV populations and ecosystem resiliency. One quick note there, our Department of Environmental Protection and Sustainability will actually talk a little bit about potential local dredging that could occur as a result of this community benefits agreement that would open up some of the recreational activities that I think Mr. Selmer and Mr. Hutton are referencing. So I'll stop there. Let me open it up to our committee if they have any questions, comments, or feedback on some of the emails received. And if not, we'll go to the Maryland Department of Natural Resources for the first presentation. Brian? You're muted, Brian.
Wait a minute. Let me unmute. Hold on.
You're good.
Am I good?
Yeah.
I just want to let everybody know that from other areas of the county, I'm over here in North Point, Jones's Creek, right around the corner from Bear Creek. I want the folks to know that over in Sioux Creek and Back River and our dredging committee, we can all form one dredging committee to work together to be unified. And I did see the Baltimore County Dave, was it Dave Rittner? Yeah. Baltimore County has a signature program, had one and still has it with the Department of the Environment signature program of dredging. At one time, dredging was a nasty word for recreational, and it found out through Candy Seabad, which was Dave's predecessor, that we have a signature program. And if we can bring that back, it's already there. The personnel on Baltimore County are just sitting there. The paperwork could be, some of it can just be revised. So this is very, very encouraging to folks out there that want their waterways restored. Done.
Thanks, Brian. Any other committee members? And actually, before we go to presentations, Scott Pappas joined us from our steering committee. So Scott, want to see if you want to do a quick introduction for yourself, and then I'll go to Paul.
Sure. Hi, it's Scott Pappas from Fort Howard. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Paul?
Let me unmute here. The WebEx is relatively new for me. One of the things I think we need to do, I know time frame is of the essence. We want to get this done, and even though it's supposed to be, it will be approved by the county at the end of December. I think my understanding is we really need to finish this by December 1st. So I think we need a draft. I would like to, at least by next time we meet, if not prior, a draft of what the community agreement looks like. All the things that we've talked about, so we can at least review that. And a lot of good ideas, I think one of the critical pieces in talking with this, and this is something that came up even with the drafting of the legislation, was this definition of vicinity. I've heard today, Brian's over at Old Road Bay, Gloria's over at Solars Point. There was issues raised by Water's Edge. We have Sioux Creek, and I think we need to talk about vicinity in terms of what does that mean. And maybe, and so that's going to be tough, but maybe by next meeting we can have options. What are some of the options? What are we talking about? And we try to get that more specific in legislation, but it wasn't possible to do that. I think the other issue is, and I think it was raised. I think it was raised by by Keith, and this was raised in the last meeting. Is this issue of community benefit related to the dredging, as opposed to community benefit related to other operations, particularly the terminal, that impacts, frankly, a different community or different communities. And I think it kind of muddies the water, no pun intended, in terms of what are we talking about? How far are we going to spread to the community benefit? And maybe there's additional community benefits that maybe communities may need or want or deserve. The other issue that I think is hard, it's hard to talk about community benefit if we don't know what the price is. What are we talking about? I frankly don't think we can have a community benefit until there is a price, until there is a dollar sign. So those are the areas I think that have risen that I've heard, or at least I have some concerns about. And the sooner we can resolve those, and I don't think we can resolve them tonight, but as soon as we can, but we have a meeting, I think by next meeting, we have to come to some resolution, or at least some focused areas that we can have a meaningful discussion.
Thanks, Paul. And I totally agree. We have a short timeline. And so, I think your suggestion on kind of defining vicinity and getting to a draft agreement sooner rather than later is helpful. So I think what we should do is we should talk maybe in a little bit more detail about those concepts when we get to that open discussion part of the agenda. But yeah, I think those are great points. One last housekeeping item. Tucker, is Gloria on?
Yeah, I believe she's calling user number 7.
Gloria, did you want to do a quick introduction? And then I was going to start off the presentations. But Gloria, go ahead.
Yes. I do apologize. I'm having technical issues. Gloria Nelson, President of the Turner Station Conservation Teams.
Thanks, Gloria. Great to have you.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, wanted to start off kind of the presentations, and kind of the idea was, to get some foundation on the types of things that we could see both at the island and in the vicinity of the area. And then the last presentation, of course, is Trade Point, to talk about that environmental process that I mentioned earlier. But wanted to start with the Department of Natural Resources, because I know they're on a shorter timeline and have to leave at some point before the end of the meeting tonight. And Richard, is that you?
It is me, and yes, I need to be leaving very shortly, unfortunately. But we'll start off this with we're here as DNR, and I'm obviously part of the state. And what we're here to talk about tonight is a community benefits agreement, not a state benefits agreement. Therefore, we're really not in a position or a desired position to tell you what we want on the island or anywhere else. We want to respect the community needs. And I know that some people want to say, hey, what's my left and right bounds? And we can do that. There's a few items we should keep in mind, and that is, what is the desired output of Hart-Miller Island? In DNR's mind, it's still developing. However, this has been a goal for a wildlife area with some supportive recreational types of items. One of the concerns that we might have is if things get too big, like multiple restroom facilities and multiple eateries or big eateries or something like that, there's a very high likelihood that MDE would want us to install a wastewater treatment plant. And if that's the case, we probably don't want to dedicate the space and the remoteness and the beauty of the natural environment for a wastewater treatment plant. So there's things that we need to be looking for and keeping our scope in perspective to develop a natural wildlife area. And while we agree that there's probably recreational benefits and recreational items that we can do on the island, we want to make sure we meet that mission. We also want to make sure we meet the mission to all Marylanders. So we want to make sure there's ADA accommodations. We want to make sure that there's a variety of recreation and a variety of uses for the island, whether it's bird watching or camping or boating or swimming or biking or just going out there watching the sunset and eating a snowball. We want to make sure that we meet the needs of the community and not necessarily state. So I'm not going to talk to you about that. One of the big concerns that we have is the island is an island. There are no roads going there. On all the rest of our camping sites, we need to have hardball roads so that emergency vehicles can get to the sites and take care of people in case there's accidents. We don't have that at HMI. So therefore, we want to make sure that we plan for and maintain safety procedures on the island and make safety one of our high priorities. Either that's by reducing the risk or by increasing emergency management facilities on the island. So that's one of the would be one of our main goals. Let's see. And the other thing that we need to be mindful of is, while it's great that there's community benefits, and normally that's capital budgets, we want to make sure that whatever we install is feasible for the long run. That goes from a maintenance perspective, but it also goes from an economic perspective. So if we put out, one of the ideas I heard was putting out a venue and a private entity running a catering type of thing. That's all fine and good, but there needs to be an economic evaluation of whether that is a sustainable practice. So we want to make sure that what we put up there is sustainable in multiple ways, is safe, and again, meets the needs of the community. And with that, I think I'm going to stop there and throw it out for any questions.
Thanks, Richard. We'll open it up to the committee members if you have any questions for Richard on DNR and the island. Fran?
Well, one question about your comments. So the committee is going to be working on putting together this priority list for the improvements on the island. Will DNR be able to take a look at that before we move forward on those and tell us realistically which ones can happen. I think that's going to really be important.
I will say that we would be happy to take a look at that list, particularly on anything touching state property. You know, things that you're doing in the community is stuff that you're doing in the community. But if it's on state property, we can take a look at it. I don't think we're going to come back and say, yes, this is 100%, because nothing's been vetted. And there's some of those projects, you know, if you're building, you know, $1 million facility on HMI, there's quite a bit of extensive review that needs to go through that, as well as permitting. It's everybody should know that's all in a critical area. So there's lots of rules about critical area building. There's also rules about, again, like I talked about, once we hit a threshold, we have to put a wastewater treatment plant in. Those kinds of concerns won't come up until after permitting start or permitting review starts. We can give you an initial assessment. Yes, Fran.
Yeah, and Fran, I'll add to that. I mean, probably the biggest reason that, you know, we have Richard included as a member on this committee is, of course, you know, DNR owns the island, and you know, we don't want to suggest things that are completely infeasible as part of the community benefits agreement. So I think Richard is certainly not like a yes, but if something is a hard no, that would be helpful information, you know, as we go into the process. But appreciate that.
Casino is a hard no.
No casinos. Okay, got it.
Unless we're told by the governor or the legislature.
Fair enough. Paul.
Yes, obviously this is a very complex situation. We have money that's going to the county that at some point is going to offer community benefits to a state project. And I'm not sure how much we put in that community agreement, but I think to recognize that, and Richard said it before, have already said it, some of these projects are long-term projects. So the issue is flow of cash, and how are we working together collaboratively with the county, in concert with DNR, to make and with the community, obviously, to really make this happen. And I think it's going to. I don't think that can be spelled out in the community benefit specifically, but then understanding that there needs to be probably some really creative minds to understand how that happens, because it's important that that's done efficiently, and that it's clear, because we don't know who is going to really be at the table representing those bodies.
Got it. Any other questions or comments for Richard?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we got you.
Yeah, listen, I want to make two simple points. You're well aware of the fact that I have an interest as a community benefit for some enhancements, maybe repairs, whatnot, at the actual North Point State Park. I'd like to also highlight the fact that the North Point State Park, I believe Pleasure Island, North Point, or Battle Acre, I should say, and Hart-Miller Island are all in the same constellation. So I think the whole thing should be looked at holistically in terms of benefits. And lastly, the idea of expanding, amenities and camping and things of that nature is a very wonderful idea. One thing I would like to highlight also is the transportation issue. It was brought up that Hart-Miller Island is an island. There is no roadway to Hart-Miller Island. So there is a question of how would people access these community benefits. It would definitely be an impediment. I just want to put that on the record also. Thank you.
Hey, Scott, this is Rich. I want to tell you that I received, I believe you're the one who sent it from regarding North Point. I did receive, and I went back to my engineering construction group. We have 3 active projects there. One is the trolley loop. Another one is a beach replenishment, and a nature trail going on at North Point State Park. So there are the 3 active projects right now.
Great. I was hoping that we could have possibly had those plans and ideas shared amongst the committee members so that we could see how viable it was for any or all of this to be included as a community benefit.
I certainly can share them. However, I did get the question yesterday afternoon, so
No. I appreciate you jumping on it as quickly as you did, Richard, and I mean that sincerely. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
Thanks, Scott. Any other questions for Richard?
Samir,
Yes.
if you can give me one thing, and this is for Aaron's presentation, I think at the end, he's talking about all the environmental protections. And Aaron, unless you updated your presentation from what Samir put out, there is one additional protection that is out there that I didn't see highlighted in the presentation. I don't want to get, because I'm going to have to drop off. There is also a disposal permit, or I'm sorry, wastewater, or no, I'm sorry, not wastewater, a water discharge permit for HMI. I guess the presentation that Aaron has and Pete has talks a lot about the actual dredging of the actual TPA property there, or the bottom, but it doesn't talk about the HMI water discharge permit. There is a whole water discharge permit, so there are additional environmental protections from that water discharge permit. I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, Richard, on the last slide, we do mention the NIPD's permit for Hart-Miller Island.
Okay, sorry, thank you.
And that would be, and I'll get into it in a few minutes, but that would be certainly a modification. Without getting too far ahead of us, I did say that a public hearing for that process would be likely. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, but that's NDE's call. But yes, I just want to make sure that everybody was aware of that. Thank you.
We will cover that, and that is certainly a separate and distinct permitting process apart from the community benefit agreement. That's a fairly rigorous process, so we'll make sure that's mentioned.
Thank you.
Got it. Thanks, Richard. Appreciate you hopping on. I know you have to hop at 7:15, so glad you're able to join us tonight and look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thanks, Richard.
All right. So let's jump to our next presentation with our county's Department of Environmental Protection and Sustainability. Tucker has the slides that you guys provided, so we'll be able to post those up. But if you guys want to take it from there, I'll kick it to you.
Hello, there. I can put this up there. Here. Shoot, did I just disconnect? Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, we got you, Dave. I think if you want to share, that's fine. I mean, Tucker can also share your presentation if that helps too, however you prefer to do it.
I think I would rather share mine if that's okay.
Go for it. Yeah,
that's fine.
Because I have some notes on here. If I can start over again, please. Okay. Okay. So tonight at the presentation for my tonight is going to cover some background information about the Department of Environmental Protection and Sustainability's Waterway Restoration Program, the dredging process, current dredging projects, hydrographic surveys that we're actively doing right now, fiscal year 26 Waterway Improvement Fund grant request, and then time permitting, some discussion. Bear with me. There we go. Okay. All right. Now a little bit of difficulty here. All right. There we go. I found. I worked around. Everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the primary responsibilities of the Department of Environmental Protection, Sustainability, Water Restoration Program are maintenance dredging of the county's waterways, implementation of shoreline enhancement projects to improve water quality and habitat, thereby assisting with the MS4 permit compliance and overseeing the SAV monitoring. Other projects include the Back River trash boom, derelict crab trap removal, and various other projects and requests for assistance from the community. Hang on. Got it. Okay. Okay, so there are more than 18,000 registered vessels in Baltimore County. That's second only to Anne Arundel County in the state. Dredging projects are funded by county bonds and Department of Natural Resource Waterway Improvement Funds. The Water Improvement Fund is funded by excise taxes and a small portion of the fuel tax. There are 28 channels in Baltimore County. Many of them have multiple channel segments. To date, Baltimore County has completed 37 dredging projects. The table on the right indicates the last time each channel was dredged. Hart-Miller Island stopped receiving dredge material December 31st, 2009, and has a remaining capacity of approximately 9 million cubic yards.
Excuse me, David, I'm not seeing any slides.
I see them on my screen, Paul. I don't know if anyone else is having issues seeing them.
I see everything.
I see it.
I'll see what I can do. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dave. Well, we can.
Okay.
Yep.
So prior to the closure of Hart-Miller Island, or when they stopped receiving dredge material, Baltimore County went out and dredged all the channels one more time because of the uncertainty of future placement and the expense associated with transporting the dredge material greater distances. So with the recent legislation reopening Hart-Miller Island, as well as providing community benefits, we see a great opportunity to provide maintenance dredging of the county's waterways. In addition to this legislation, there was other legislation that was passed that allowed for the Waterway Improvement Fund to finance beneficially used dredge material projects. Examples of that would be beach nourishment, shoreline enhancement, and marsh creation. So the dredging process begins with the data collection. This would include hydrographic surveys, SAV surveys, and sediment sampling. And that is all used in the planning and sequencing of our projects. Dredging placement is also a big consideration. Where are we going to take the dredge material to? Are we going to put it upland, or are we going to reuse it? Other tasks include community outreach, permitting, the bidding process, advertising, awarding the project, and contract execution. Then we proceed with staking out the channel, constructing the channel, doing a post-dredge survey to make sure that the dimensions and the depth are to the permit and the plans. So currently, there are 2 dredging projects. We have the Pleasure Island Channel Maintenance and Beneficial Use Project and the Shallow Creek Maintenance Dredging Project. Additionally, we're conducting hydrographic surveys of the county's channels to assess conditions, which will assist with the prioritization in response to the HMI legislation. The 2 dredging projects that we have going on now, Pleasure Island Shallow, were initiated prior to the change in status of Hart-Miller Island. The Pleasure Island project is in the design and permitting phase. The Pleasure Island Channel, also known as the Cut by most people, was last dredged in 2011. At that time, we did a beneficial use project along Pleasure Island with the dredge material. Whoops, sorry, folks. The volume of the material that needs to be dredged from the cut is approximately, I'm on the wrong slide, 34,000 cubic yards. And we're looking to use that beneficially for beach nourishment and marsh creation. This project will restore the channel depth to -8 feet. The Shallow Creek Maintenance Dredging Project is in design and permitting as well. The volume of the material that needs to be dredged is approximately 26,000 cubic yards. We have preliminary approval to place that material at the Maryland Port Administration's Cox Creek Dredge Material Containment Facility. We're working towards initiating construction fall of 2025. This project is receiving a WIF grant, Waterway Improvement Fund grant, covering 50% of the cost. And if I could go back to the very quickly, Pleasure Island, this one is also receiving waterway improvement funds and will likely be covered 100%. So that's a great benefit. The other project that we have going on in support of our dredging is the hydrographic surveys. This is a short duration project that's being conducted to assess the county's channels and assist with planning and prioritization. To date, we've completed the surveys for Seneca Creek, Goose Harbor, Galloway Creek, Chestnut Cove, Middle River, Maine, and Hopkins Creek, with the goal of completing Middle River by the end of August. This project has a WIF grant as well, covering 50% of the cost. So in support of current and future dredging projects, DEPS will be submitting up to 4 applications for fiscal year 26. This would be construction money for the Pleasure Island project, construction money for the Shallot Creek project, funding for permitting of all the Baltimore County channels, and also the design and construction of a maintenance dredging project to be determined, and that'll be based off of the information we get from these hydrographic surveys. Additionally, the permitting of the Baltimore County waterways is an approach that we're using to help ensure that we meet the December 31st, 2027 deadline that was included in the legislation, where the projects have to be approved by MDE by that date. And we're hoping to get everything permitted so then we can construct these or dredge these in out years. So consideration for the HMI steering committee include providing feedback on the dredging prioritization. This would include the dredging, sorry folks, the dredging need, what channel needs it most, what channels have lost capacity due to silting or shoaling, maximizing the benefit to the public and the boaters, time since the channels were last dredged, and the proximity to Hart-Miller Island. This could be looked at as the cost of transporting the dredge material or by the people that are affected by the HMI operations. But by leveraging the community benefit money with funds, we are able to address much of the county's dredging needs. So DEPS is proceeding with the planning and permitting, so we'll be in a better position to select these projects and apply for WIF funds and proceed with dredging. Any questions?
David, this is Pete Haid. Just not fully understanding the grant process. If you're getting grant money for these projects, is it you're just not anticipating getting full coverage? Why would you want to utilize the funds in the community benefit agreement if you're getting grant funding elsewhere?
Correct. Typically, the Waterway Improvement Fund provides 50% of the cost for design and construction. The one project that I'm doing at Pleasure Island at the cut, which is between Miller Island and Pleasure Island, is 100% because of the volume of traffic that area, it's kind of a statewide channel almost. So the DNR WIF looks at it a little differently. So I'm not going to turn their money down. But so typically we would fund county projects using county bonds and then leveraging that to get the balance of the money from WIF.
Pete, the other thing I'd add very quickly, and thank you for that, Dave. So if I understand it correctly, we get grants on kind of a project by project basis. So there are certain years where we don't have a funding allocation through WIF, and other years where there is funding made available. I think the potential opportunity here is to expand the maintenance dredging program, which I've heard a lot about through the various comments that we've received in the website that I kind of read out loud at the beginning of the meeting, and to create some more sustainability and consistency in how that funding flows. I don't know, Dave, if you wanted to add to that or clarify.
Right now, it has been a case-by-case basis. We have not had a very robust dredging program since Hart-Miller Island stopped receiving material. So the most recent project we dredged was Bird River because that had a dedicated placement facility upland. With this unexpected reopening of Hart-Miller Island, we're re-examining the county's waterways and seeing what we can do to help.
Got it. Council Member Crandall.
Thanks,
Here.
Mayor. Thanks, everybody, for being on tonight. Dave, you don't have to go back to the slide, but can you just refresh us a little bit on the allowances at HB, geez, it was, whatever it was, 434, 534. It just refresh us on what that may allow the county to do on recreational, like local waterways, dredge material placement?
If I understood you correctly, you were asking about the other legislation with regard to the beneficial use of dredge material. So what you're asking?
Yes.
The legislation now allows these waterway improvement funds, which were previously directed at projects that improved boating directly. So they wouldn't pay for other services that didn't help boating. But now they have expanded the operations because they realize that there's a capacity crunch. We're running out of places to put material. This is a little bit unrelated to the HMI, but so we have to look at other solutions for reusing the dredge material. So this just allows, it gives the Waterway Improvement Fund some flexibility if they see a good project, that they could use it beneficially.
Okay, and just to sort of extrapolate on that, the estimate from TPA, should this happen, would be that they would fill maybe half of the remaining capacity at Hart-Miller. So a beneficial use could potentially be Baltimore County dredging, dredge material placement at Hart-Miller Island from Baltimore County. Would that be considered a beneficial use?
Well, the approach, the two projects that are in design and permitting right now were initiated prior to Hart-Miller Island legislation, reopening Hart-Miller Island. So we were looking at the placement options for the dredge material. One of the projects, Shallow Creek, is going to go to a Maryland Port Administration containment facility at Cox Creek.
Right.
The other project, Pleasure Island, does not qualify to go to Cox Creek. It's outside the Baltimore Harbor, which is dedicated to the Cox Creek facility. So our other option is to use the dredge material beneficially. Our fallback position, if we are unable to use the material beneficially, would be to take it to Hart-Miller Island. But our first choice, since the state is going to pay 100%, or at least that's what they've indicated, is to do a beneficial use project, which would be beach nourishment and marsh creation.
Okay. So Hart-Miller Island then becomes potentially advantageous should community benefit money be used for dredging projects. Say, for instance, on your chart there's some local waterways that haven't been dredged since 2009, or maybe even older than that. So if the Baltimore County dredging program can somehow be expedited through the CBA, then Baltimore County would obviously need permission for dredge material placement at Hart-Miller Island, correct?
It's my understanding that I would be able to take the dredge material from those waterways you're referencing to Hart-Miller Island.
Already?
Yes, I won't have to do a beneficial use if excuse me?
Based on the recent legislation, it would already.
Yes, that's my interpretation of it. Yes.
And Dave, I can clarify that's my interpretation of it as well. We'll need MDE approval to place at Hart-Miller Island, but the bill as written allows for local dredging material to be placed at the island. And again, just to clarify, you talked about the 9 million cubic yards. When you're talking about kind of local dredging projects, we're talking about maybe like tens of thousands of cubic yards. We're not talking about kind of, the material, the level material that would be associated with like a container terminal project. Just to
So that gets to my question in terms of, it's the first I'm hearing this, and it's very interesting because I do remember the last time, and it's pretty regularly because I've been on the committee for 30 years or more, and it's a nice thing to have in their local community somewhere we can put some of the maintenance dredging. So I guess my question is this something that's already everyone else is aware of? How's it, in other words, how does this impact the current plan? in terms of Trade Point. I know it's small, but one of the things I remember when these projects have come up in the past is how do they become integrated? What's the priority in terms of how it goes? I mean, there's a lot of details there. So I want to hear more about that and the cost, obviously, and if there's any way of offsetting the cost. And just as an option too, it's a more expensive option, but because the dredge is not part of Patapsco, that allows it to go other places like Popular or further down. They're more expensive, but there are options other than a containment site.
And Paul, I think we would certainly have to defer to DNR and MES as far as the actual logistics and mechanisms. And as Samir mentioned before, there'd also be a permitting process, tidal wetlands permit or license required to place this material.
I mean, living in that area, boating in that area, it's certainly needed.
Yep. Thanks for that. And that's something we've continued to hear about, the need for maintenance dredging. So that's a great flag, and fortunately something we might be positioned to do. I do want to keep us close on schedule. I know we started a bit late, and so our third presentation tonight is from Trade Point Atlantic to talk a little bit about the environmental regulatory process that would govern their container terminal project. And so I'll kick it to Pete and Aaron to talk through that.
Thanks, Samir, and I'll be depending on Tucker to work the slides. He's gonna have to work for his dinner tonight. Pete Haid, Senior Vice President of Environmental for Trade Point Atlantic. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for making the time and giving me this opportunity to talk about our project. I have 3 slides tonight, and the slides really talk about the permitting process that is separate and distinct from the community benefit agreement. And I also talk a little bit about the sampling that we've done and are doing for the dredge material. We've heard some concerns and some questions concerning both the community benefit agreement and what happens thereafter if it's agreed to, and we've heard some questions about the sampling of the material. So I wanted to address that tonight. Tucker, if you could go to the next slide, that'd be helpful. The permitting I'm talking about is for the entire container terminal project. It's a significant project, and significant is defined by the Army Corps. If you have a significant project, you have to go through the NEPA environmental permitting process. NEPA stands for National Environmental Policy Act. The heart of the NEPA is to ensure that any significant project has a disclosure and consideration of all the environmental impacts. In the old days, and I'm getting to a point where I can use that expression, the old days. In the old days, if you had a project, even a large, significant project, we'd go out and do some calculations of some air emissions. We'll look at maybe some water discharge, but that may have been at the extent of it. Underneath the umbrella of the NEPA process, the identification of environmental impacts is much more rigorous, much more comprehensive, and frankly, much more exhausting and never ending, it seems. We're not just looking at air or water, we look at traffic, we look at noise, we look at impact onto fauna, we look at social economic impacts, hydrodynamics, and view shed impacts too. So the work that's being done is to holistically look at what this project can affect. And the results of these studies and these assessments are put into an environmental impact statement. That statement's pretty much the heart and soul of a NEPA process. And that statement allows the agencies to review the alternatives, just like we're looking at different alternatives to the dredge material. There's alternatives for many different aspects of a project. That EIS allows the agencies to make an informed decision when they do make their decision. So we're currently going through this process. We've been in this process officially since December 18th of 2023. I don't know if you can see it on the slide, but the second arrow from the left is there's a little green wording that says project is here. We're in the fall and winter of 2024. As you can see, we are meeting with the HMI steering committee. We are also having ongoing dialogues and reaching out to community members. TPA Community Advisory Board workshops will be held. Our next steps is in the winter of 2025. We intend to have the draft environmental impact statement ready for publication. This is a process that's overseen and essentially run by the Corps of Engineers. The Corps of Engineers, once they have that draft EIS, is going to publicize it in the Federal Register, and they're going to put it out with public notice. There'll be a 45-day public notice, and there will be a public meeting to cover the draft EIS. They will collect all the comments and the feedback, and we would hope and project that by spring of 2025, the Army Corps will have finished their review of the comments and make revisions to the final environmental impact statement based on the comments and feedback that they've received. And we anticipate then sometime in the summer of 2025 that the final environmental impact statement will be issued. And the decisions the Army Corps makes, whether it's on dredging or air emissions or structure of the facility, will be dependent on that environmental impact statement. And if we go along according to schedule, we would anticipate construction starting at 2025 to 2028. And I would emphasize that this process here, whether we were involved with Hart-Miller Island or not, whether the community benefit agreement goes through or not, this process will continue. So even if the Hart-Miller Island is approved, we still have to go through this process. It is an ongoing process, and throughout this process, we will continue to outreach to the communities and our good neighbors around us to discuss our progress and share the information.
Pete, before you go to the prior, go to the next slide, I just want to take a comment that was shared, that Samir shared regarding maybe some confusion around community benefit agreement for the placement of dredge material and this. And you know, the NEPA process, you know, does produce impacts statements of kind of what the impacts are, as Peter talked about. And there are mitigation requirements that will be determined by the agencies around those particular impacts. Typically, those mitigation requirements are projects that are done in the impacted area or around the communities in the impacted area. So that's kind of like, as we look at the impact of that portion of the project, that will be helped. That's a separate piece. And those mitigation projects are in many ways the benefits that go into the community in the form of environmental restoration projects or projects in the community as determined by the agencies. So that's factoring in the actual impact of the terminal as opposed to what we're doing with the dredge material, even though the dredge material you know, community benefit is going to be quite sizable. And we'll talk to that definitely later on. But I just want to kind of use this point to highlight where that the separation is, because this is a NEPA process which is separate from what we're doing with HMI.
Thanks, Aaron. And that highlights the criticality of the impact assessment that is done in this NEPA process, because mitigation projects will result depending on the type of impacts that are identified.
I have a statement and a question. For my statement is, thank you for that clarification, Aaron. I really do. That got at what I was getting at earlier. So I do appreciate that clarification. The question is, so you're saying, what we're saying is between 2025 and 2028, the project will be complete?
That's correct.
And does that take into account the planning for closure and involvement of MPA?
I'm
No,
not sure I
that's
understand your question, Paul.
Paul, that's the construction of the container terminal, as
Right.
identified by the NEPA process.
Okay, so there might be additional time needed in order to prepare, because the reason I raise that is that's the preparation that occurs in order for the island, the north cell, to be turned over to DNR. And so that's my question about that. That's certainly there's the construction project, but then there's the transition from construction to preparing the site, which is MPA still on the hook for that in order to turn that over to DNR.
Yeah, and that will be a longer term timeline and more of the project arc. This particular
Right.
piece that we're looking at is just the permitting for the construction of the container terminal itself.
And the reason I asked that is this was, I'm going back to 2009 when it was closed, and here we are, 2024, and that hasn't not been done. So we want to make sure that and that it's in a place, the best possible place to be able to turn that over in a way that's can be usable.
And Paul, as Aaron said, this timeline is reflective of the project, even if we didn't go to HMI. Your point is well taken, that after it will be 3 years of placement into HMI, but then there'll still be a drying out and a prepping period before then there's a closure period thereafter that.
Well, I imagine there'll be multiple times to air. I mean, one of the questions, I don't want to get into detail, but the question from the committee, from the COC, would be the process whereby crust management occurs. What's the depth of crust management? Because, and the reason I raise that is that's a very, 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 very ambitious schedule.
And we do defer quite a bit to the DNR as far as final plans go and MES. The placement of the material, the final plan will inform how the material coming into Hart-Miller Island is placed, I imagine. And a lot of that we will defer to the experts, both DNR and MES. But there will be, even after placement, certainly a good period of time where there's crust management, there's drying out, and then after that, we get to the closure activities.
Well, but we both know there's, well, we won't get into detail. There needs to be periodic crust management.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and Paul, and again, point well taken, especially for kind of, I think, making sure everybody understands process as, and we can coordinate with DNR and MES on getting a kind of an outline on kind of what the HMI timeline is. And I think it's important that we show that. So, good point. Mm-hmm.
So one of the impacts, of course, that we're looking at through the NEPA process in the environmental impact statement and then general permitting process is the dredge material. And Tucker, if you could slide into the next slide here. One of the critical questions is what is this material? What is it made of? What constituents may be present in it? What the material is, of course, also informs what we can do with it. If the material is acceptable, it could go to HMI. If it's not, it would have to go somewhere else. We've worked with the MDE and EPA. We put together an extensive sampling and analysis plan, which they've approved, to ensure that we get as a dense and as well defined aerial distribution of the material. So we recognize that the dredge material may be different in different locations. So we've broken up the locations into 28 different dredge units or different areas so that we can have a better idea and more defined of what the material is in these smaller units. We've installed 97 discrete boring sample locations that go full depth to where we'll be dredging to. So we've done a high density sampling in connection, and in the same time, the analysis that's being run is a full suite of analysis. So we're running for VOCs, SVOCs, PAHs, T-clip waste, metals, PCBs, even for the water placement options, toxicological testing. So we've done both a very high density sampling to get a real good picture of where things are and a full suite of analysis. So we have a great understanding, or will have a great understanding when we get the results of where material is and what the material is. Those results will be submitted to the MDE and the EPA, and we will, of course, also share that with the DNR, since HMI is one of the alternatives. And MDE and EPA will have to review and approve these results. Of course, if they don't approve the results for HMI, we would have to look at other alternatives. The final agency approval is really what's going to inform where the material ultimately goes. One thing we will be doing in the near future is holding workshops for community leaders to discuss the results of these analysis. We hope to have the results, we're still shooting for the end of the month or early September.
So real quick, for those who are members of the Community Advisory Board, of course, this panel would be included in those briefings. We're hoping for September 17th. That's the date of our Community Advisory Board meeting that's a date we set a while back. But our goal is to try to hopefully be able to be in a position to have that information ready for that meeting. So we'll be using that time to go over this information, as Pete indicated. So, thank you.
And at that time, we'll review the sampling analysis plan, the sampling work that we've done, the layout and exact locations of the material.
Yep. And again, this is just a workshop to kind of make sure everybody has the information. It's something we're doing as part of our community process that we've always been doing since we took over the CML 10 years ago. It's just keeping people engaged. Thank you.
So with this information, in part, we will also have to go to the next phase of permitting. And Tucker, if you could please go to the next slide. So whether the CBA is finalized or not for Trade Point to dredge the access channel for the container terminal, we would have to acquire a tidal wetlands license permit. Probably would take between November 24 to at least July of 2025 to attain this permit. This license would be required for any dredge facility that the material is going to. It's required for any dredge that we're doing. The process includes a lengthy application period. There will be, again, a public notice for this license itself. There will be a public hearing. The process itself is overseen by the MDE and the Board of Public Works, and final approval is issued by the MDE and Board of Public Works. Some of the things that are built into these licenses that are conditions of the license. One is we have to provide the results to the MDE, the analysis results, and they have to prove it, of course. The license itself specifies the location where the material will go to, and obviously the material would then have to meet that location standards. Often these licenses have seasonal prohibitions. The license that we typically get require watertight barges. And I bring that up only because we received a comment last week about leaking barges. The license addresses that. It often includes best management practices as may be applicable to the work. For instance, and what we're showing here on the photo here is an environmental bucket. It would be a best management practice. Turbidity curtains could also be a best management practice. We have in previous dredge projects used this environmental bucket. As a matter of fact, this is one of our projects, and we've measured and monitored the turbidity, and we have found that the environmental buckets are extremely effective when it comes to managing and keeping localized any turbidity that's stirred up during the dredging project. Another associated, I'm sorry, was there a question? Another associated certification is the water quality certification from the MDE. This ensures protection of the waters of the state by the MDE. And now the last permit on the slide here is the NIPD's permit for Hart-Miller Island. This would only be necessary if Hart-Miller Island is approved, and it would not be something that TPA would handle, but it would be yet another permitting process that would have to go through. At this point, it would be, I guess, DNR and MES would have to go through. The National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, or NIPD's as is commonly referred to, and this is what Richard was referring to before he had to sign off. The NIPD's permit allows Hart-Miller Island to discharge their wastewater or their rainwater, if you will. Currently, the NIPD's permit identifies Hart-Miller Island as a DMCF, but as an out-of-service DMCF. If Hart-Miller Island was to begin receiving dredge material, that NIPD's permit would have to be modified to reflect that it's now an active DMCF. And with that, I would imagine there would be a significant amount of additional sampling and monitoring conditions that would come with the permit. Right now, they're essentially handling rainwater. That permit typically, and I asked Rich before he signed off, and I think he concurred, that permit also is a fairly lengthy permit process. It includes a public hearing. So again, this is going to be a well-vetted permit. I know that MES is looking at Hart-Miller Island now. If it turns out that there is upgrades that are required to the island, spillways, for instance, that are located on the outside of the island, outside of the berm, that puts you in tidal wetlands, they would have to pull a tidal wetlands license permit and go through the same steps that I had just discussed previously, where we're getting a tidal wetlands license for dredging. They would likely have to get one for any upgrades done to the island. So to kind of put it in a nutshell, just because the community benefit agreement is agreed to, it doesn't mean the next day that material will be placed at Hart-Miller Island. There is still a fairly lengthy and rigorous permitting process that is well publicized and in many cases includes public hearings that would have to go through and have to be satisfied. The MDE would have to be satisfied with the process before any material is placed into Hart-Miller Island. The agreement of the community benefit agreement is basically, or a finalization of that agreement is basically just the first step or first gate that you would have to go through. And of course, if it doesn't come to fruition, then we still go through a tidal wetlands license permit process, but it would be for a different facility. And Tuck, if you could just go just to the next slide, please. Here's where you can find some additional details on the overall project.
It's a good presentation. I think it really spells out the process really well. But just keep in mind, and it might be helpful to look at the 35 years of data, because this is now getting into the role of the COC in terms of this. This is something we would be looking at as a citizens group together, and you would be working with us similar to or the same way MPA has over years, and in Maryland Environmental. And I think it might be helpful to share some of that data, because it's incredible amount of data that we receive, and it's public domain. And I think it might help in the community understanding the level of oversight. Now that's assuming everything goes through. That is assuming you get all the permits. That assuming, but if we get there, or when we get there, I think it might be helpful to have be looking at that in terms of the detail. Another thing that we would request is that some of those tests, some of those results would be such that it's easier for us to digest, because maybe some kind of dashboard, because it got a 200-page document, even with executive summary, and that's the way I think that's how I see this happening. Us supporting the process and overseeing the process. There are people may want to know. I mean, there's still some testing going on, even though the permits, everything's expired, and that's been of a voluntary nature. And those results are available on, I believe it's MES's website. Every year we do groundwater, so there's consistent monitoring, even though not as detailed as you guys will need to do. But I think the other thing I would suggest is that the frequency of monitoring is such where it hopefully could be in line with the previous monitoring. And that going forward, that you'd use the same sites. Because one of the concerns we had, and Richard was involved at that point too, and he agreed with that at that point, although it never came to fruition, that we would look at those sites over time. They're longitudinal sites. So we would see in case there's any trends, because sometimes there is a little uptick. It may not be because of the island. It never won't fall within the concern. The concern in terms of level of concern is something you want to watch. But I think the way that data is reported, but I think it's a good idea to maybe share some of that at some point to look at the detail of the reporting.
All excellent points, Paul. We certainly are looking at when the results come in to get something of a dashboard or an executive summary, something, you say a couple hundred pages of data. It is not a couple hundred pages.
I'm talking about the report, the actual report. Well, I can show you the report.
Thousands.
That's thousands. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So we would look to we work with a toxicologist and a consultant to put together something that is clear, and certainly make the results available, but something we communicate what these results really mean. I have spoke to the MD a little bit. There are monitoring wells on the perimeter so moving those would be a little more difficult. We would stick with those. So as far as having a historic trend analysis, we would have the results up to date from these wells, and we continue sampling these wells. I do understand that MDE used to also sample surface water offshore. And I would not be surprised if that's something that the MDE would look for us to recommence. I think they've stopped years ago, I think because of success. They weren't seeing anything that was worth continuing to monitor. But these are things would be part of either the NIPD's permit or the tidal wetlands license that certainly the agencies would be interested in seeing.
Yep.
Thanks, Pete. I wanted to open it up to the rest of the committee. Are there any other questions for Pete and Trade Point Atlantic at this point?
Samir, just going to underscore that, this process that's outlined in these slides, we're actually going to be creating an information piece that will have this information in addition to other dredge related information that will be produced and widely distributed, and will be also on our SBCT website. So as Pete said, we're going to keep everybody informed in this process as we go through it, and the workshops that we've got set up are designed to kind of simplify the results and be able to kind of make them relatable to people so they can understand the material. So
thanks, Aaron. And I think we indicated in the chat as well, we'll be posting this presentation, the presentation from county apps, along with an agenda and minutes on our website for this process. So appreciate that and appreciate the presentation. So I wanted to hit the next item on the agenda. I know we're probably a little bit over on time, but we did start late. And get into kind of some open dialogue for the committee membership itself. And I wanted to, I guess, start by pivoting back to you, Paul, because I know you'd started to talk about some things you were interested in seeing for the next meeting.
Yeah, I think it was very helpful what you sent out to us, the example of the community benefit. It really stirred a lot of thinking, and to have something more specific to us, like what's something we can start bouncing around. The sooner we have that, the better. I think would be really helpful. it's the first I've heard about the Baltimore County sites, and I think that's interesting, and that's been done in the past. Fran's comment about spur channels, because that's, I know friends, neighbors had spur channels, and that was helpful. I certainly, that's a community benefit in itself. And then this issue of vicinity in terms of where, and especially in lieu of what Aaron was talking about in terms of people understanding that there's other activities at Trade Point that another process, the permitting for mitigation. I like that term better than community benefit, although there's a reason for that. And there's also the cost. I mean, not the cost, the actual benefit. The sooner we can get there, I think the better. I think that would help us in lots of ways. It's obvious.
So I'll actually open that up as kind of like a first item to consider for the committee. If you have any, I'll frame it this way: if you have any opposition to us taking a stab at a first draft of an agreement, in consideration of the fact that we have a tight timeline and we really do need to get this, moving within the four corners of a document, let me know, or please speak up. Or if not, I'm happy to take a lead and have a draft document circulated for the group to consider within the next week.
Brian, I think you're on mute.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
You can hear me. We can get off running here really, really fast on the recreational side of the dredging. We have an expert sitting right here, David. He goes back a long time on the dredging. Of course, I'm surprised he's still here. We're all getting a little older, and since 2009, and he really pushed through. Knowing that Hart-Miller Island was going to close, he pushed through and really kept a lot of our waterways from turning into mud flats. And they're starting to do that. So we've got an expert right here. I think Brady's agreeing with me. We can come off running. We can bring people in from all over the county. David knows where they are. We're all going to have one dredge committee. It doesn't matter where you are. We're all going to work together. And there's the guru right there from Baltimore County, David. Thank you for everything you've done. And I think you can really get us running. And Paul, I think we got somebody right here that can give us some rough estimate, something. And I think David can do that. He's got all the paperwork, everything in his computer. It's already there. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Done.
So that would be part of the draft.
Yeah, I think that certainly, I've certainly gotten feedback, as I'm sure many others have, about kind of one of the bigger needs being the ability to expand our maintenance dredging program to accommodate some additional recreational activities. So I think certainly that's something I've heard consistently, and it's something that I think we're equipped to do in short order. And it's just the resources as the missing link. So that's something we can fold into the draft agreement as a benefit to the vicinity of communities around Hart-Miller Island.
Can I ask you a question, Samir?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, when you say a draft, are you actually going to enumerate and list community benefits in this draft that you're proposing to write in the next week, or are you going to leave that blank? How are you going to address what we're talking about as actual capital projects? Again, like I said, we're looking at possibly an improvement over there at the beaches and whatnot at North Point. And I mean, I'm just asking you, will we have room to add to this list as we move forward is the question.
Yeah, I mean,
we don't have the information now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Scott, it's a good question. I would start to work in and look, we've received feedback in a couple different ways from members of the community in terms of what they want to see. I know you guys have provided me your individual thoughts. I would use that as a starting point. Of course, we have, a few more meetings, so there's an opportunity to kind of like continue to build out and refine what that list might look like. But I'd start with a draft and do my best with the support of our Office of Law to kind of like get that stuff factored in, and we can always kind of continue to talk and massage it. But it's a process, and it does need to get on paper if we're going to actually realize the opportunity. So I'd
While
still
I have the,
stop
while,
at
while I
that.
have the, while I have the floor, for one additional point, I would like to redirect all my colleagues of Mr. Tamarchio's very, 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 very needed point that the CBA is a function of the dredge placement at HMI, not a function of the NEPA process. And as Hayde pointed out, the NEPA process, the mitigation of the terminal, is that we're trying to roll in possible, train impacts or vehicle impacts or whatever impacts that are extraneous, okay, to the actual material at hand here. And I'm just trying to thank Aaron, okay, for making that distinction very, very lucid. And again, for my fellow colleagues, okay, to try to keep mindful, okay, of the separation of those two activities. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Josh, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Well, I think we should discuss how we should separate the benefits possibly. What an idea that I had, I'd like to hear some other people think on it, of a percentage of this going to Hart-Miller Island, as we've talked about, for those improvements, but then possibly separating the other percentage out between the two council districts, that it goes down to subcommittees then of the people in those districts to decide where they want that to go to in their district. That's all obviously dependent on what the amount is. And then I had one question. Is this steering committee determining that amount? Because we all got an email from a citizen today with an analysis on it that's pretty detailed on the amounts.
Samir, I could speak to the
Go
amount.
ahead, yes.
When you're ready. Yeah. So something I wanted to address on the amount. So we're working right now with the state on the actual cost of placement at HMI. So there's a number of costs and issues that we're working through with the state. We're very, very close to coming to kind of what will be a determined cost of placement of the material outside of the community benefit agreement. When we look at the cost of placement of kind of getting HMI ready to restart it, and the cost of actual placement of material, the cross management, all of the stuff that actually Paul was talking about, there's a cost that we're working on right now. The community benefit agreement is actually in it, that and the HMI costs are in our mind the total cost of placement of the utilization of HMI. The community benefit agreement, and don't want to offend anybody, is kind of basically the toll, right? That's part of the toll of utilizing the facility. As we look at it from a business perspective, that's the kind of the big pie, the total pie. So we have, working through what that number is. We should have it really soon, and I do appreciate this committee's willingness to kind of work through this until we have that number. And I know that will help inform a lot of decisions. I will say it is where if we get to where we are going, which I can see it kind of there, it's not there yet. It's going to be a significant sum of money. It's in the tens of millions. It will be the largest community benefit I think probably the state has ever seen. So.
Aaron, my question to you there was, are we negotiating with you on that amount? Is the county negotiating with you on that amount? Or are you telling us you're telling us that amount?
So, yeah, I mean, I can take some of that. So I think, this is, there's some, it's a tricky question, because if I understand kind of Trade Point's math and kind of how they're baking their pro forma out, there's a cost to place at Hart-Miller Island that the state is charging, and that I think could potentially impact the amount that would be available for the community benefits agreement. I know I've had interactions with both the state and with Trade Point in terms of where those discussions are. So I think on our side, we've been waiting to kind of understand what that cost to place is first. So Josh, I think that's the critical variable that is still being fleshed out, to at least answer part of the question. Aaron, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
No, that's it. And then honestly, I think there's there's a general cost of the dredging material placement. So if the cost for utilizing Hart-Miller Island outweigh the cost of utilizing a different method, there's a different method. I mean, business will go where it's gotta it's going to maximize the cost of the project. So that's a business decision. So it becomes a business decision at some point on how we come to that number. So so we're hoping to get that very soon, and then we'll be able to have a more earnest conversation with the county and this committee.
I wanted to go to Fran, who's had his hand up.
Hi, real quick, as far as the draft, I think it's really important that we identify the impacted areas that we're going to be talking about in this agreement. And as a starting point on that conversation, there is a 5-mile centroid buffer that circles Hart-Miller Island. Basically, the center point is the cross dike. I'd like to throw that on the table to the committee as a starting point for trying to determine what the impacted areas would be.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to raise, and something that, in terms of that definition of vicinity that I've heard, brought up a couple times. That's something that I think would be an exhibit to the agreement. So that would have to be in there, and we'd have to define kind of the areas that can be supported. What I would offer is that, I think we could produce maybe a couple options for the committee to consider in terms of like ways to interpret vicinity, if that's acceptable, and let me know if not, or if that seems like a good idea for the next meeting.
I did, obviously, but I'll just say for the group, I did include that because you requested that from the committee. In other words, every committee member has responded to that question. So I think that would be to pull that together as some options, and being flexible as we can, but also, just to say, I mean, yeah, part of the reason I want the draft is because there's several priorities that we've set for Hart-Miller Island that I had not spoken to. I didn't give a presentation tonight, but I mean that those issues to me are paramount, and that is the vicinity. It is Hart-Miller Island. Anything beyond that, I think we certainly should consider. And then the one area, I think someone put it in one of the comments in terms of, I'm sorry, it was Richard, in terms of safety. I think we need to think about safety paramount, so that we may need to look at that, those options, and make sure that we can get people out there, first responders out there in a timely manner.
Hi, this is Gloria Nelson.
Yep, go ahead.
Yes, I agree with Fran. We definitely need to know and have a definition of the vicinities, the communities within the vicinities. And when the Hart-Miller was closed, Fran is correct. It was within a 5-mile radius, protecting various communities such as Turner Station. And I certainly would like to see that list to make certain that we are included in that vicinity.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, and I think we'll do some work. We have a statistics team here called BC Stat, and so I think we can take a stab at presenting a couple options. But yeah, and I think the idea is to make sure that this is inclusive of both areas that are, in proximity to the island itself, and also to the area where the dredging is occurring. And so we're happy to kind of take a stab at that, but that's a good point.
And factor in too, if there's other options for funding. There may be project. I mean, I don't think we should be funding projects that have other potential or other funding sources, or later benefits at some point.
That's an excellent point.
Yep. Richard, I see you rejoined us and you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Samir. And I'm sorry I walked in on the back end of some comments. and if I misread them, please just tell me to shut up. It sounded like I was listening to some Baltimore County dredging that would be placed on the island. At this moment, we are doing all the planning in order to get TPA up and running by August of next year, and with a very quick 3-year time frame of putting all the material in there. If Baltimore County is planning to use a facility, we absolutely need to know that now, because that could very easily change cost. It could change the timing. It could change a lot of other things. So since this is, and the only reason why I bring this up is CBA, since it's going to change or has a possibility of changing cost to TPA, then it changes cost to CBA. So
Would it increase the CBA or decrease?
it all depends. If it's a significant amount, it may unfortunately impact TPA's desired time frame significantly.
I see.
Richard, we should have this conversation, I think, offline, of course, but it is contemplated in the legislation, which I know you've reviewed. I also think we're talking about like orders of magnitude in terms of volume. You're not, obviously maintenance dredging isn't going to produce the type of volume that you'd see for 42-foot berths at a container terminal. So I don't think, from a magnitude perspective, we're talking about something that moves the needle. We're not talking about millions of cubic yards. We're talking about maybe tens of thousands. So that's kind of
okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to make a comment about that too, because I see Delegate Long has suggested I will pre-file emergency legislation to expand areas of maintenance dredging to be placed at Hart-Miller Island for recreational boating. So are we anticipating additional legislation around what we're talking about?
So, Paul, to answer that question, I think the current bill actually covers what Delegate Long is looking at. The other thing, Richard, that I'd mentioned from Dave's presentation is, Dave, you indicated that you'd look at like alternative placement as the first order, but go ahead and elaborate on that if you could.
Well, my understanding of legislation is that Hart-Miller Island will be reopened to Baltimore County dredging projects. So the alternative placement options, when I mentioned the beneficial use, might have muddied the waters a little bit, because that's what we're looking at doing with Pleasure Island material. If there are opportunities to use it upland, we will, but they're much more expensive and less streamlined, and with the tight timeline that we have with getting things permitted and into Hart-Miller Island, that would be our first choice, is to take the material there.
Dave, one quick note as far as the timeline goes, the legislation requires that the material is permitted by the end of 2027, but it can still be placed after. So it doesn't have to be in Hart-Miller Island by the end of 2027. It just has to be permitted by MDE by the end of that year. It can then take place thereafter.
Yes, that's a good point. Our wetland license and core permits are usually good for 3 years. So what we would do with our wetlands license, if we'll try and secure those permits prior to the 2027 deadline, and then if necessary, extend them to 2028, 2029. And that way it also allows us to sequence our funding and project schedules, because we're not gonna have enough dredgers to do everything at once if we wanted to, so.
Right.
Well, once you extend the deadline, and we've been here before as a Citizens Oversight Committee. I mean, we can extend this deadline. That's why we had legislation to stop that deadline 2009. So I think we have to be careful with that. There has to be a time. This island needs to be closed at some point, so we can meet the intention and my understanding for it to become a state park.
Well, we wouldn't be looking at extending the deadline. We would be extending the permit based on the legislation. It says permitted projects by December 31st, 2027. So that's why right now we're going to go out and try and get everything permitted and have those in our back pocket. And then if a waterway needs dredging, we would try and secure either community benefit money and WIF money, or whatever else we could find to get these waterways dredged.
Got it.
And that is exactly the reason DNR needs to know about this, because we've already got plans for TPA's budget for closing the island. And if we're going to keep pumping water in there, it's going to change that closure time frame. And frankly, it's going to murky the payment schedule between whose problem is closure. Is it TPA's now, or is it Baltimore County's now? So we need to we got to sequence this hard.
Okay.
Thank you, Richard, because it also will extend the deadline of when we could put anything out there. And so if or when whatever money goes towards the Hart-Miller Island per se, it sits, and what happens with that? And are some of these other projects that are more shovel ready move forward while we're waiting again for some community benefit that we've never gotten?
I think between the county and DNR, we can pick up the maintenance dredging placement issue separately and kind of talk that one through. I do want to get to public comment at some point. Josh, I see your hand up. I don't know if you had another comment or if that was from before.
Just wanted to point one thing out, Samir. I heard there, a discussion on stretching that vicinity out 5 miles. And I think all the members should keep in mind that if it stretches out 5 miles south, it stretches out 5 miles north too. And it ends up that this thing gets spread out pretty far then, that it should be considered that way, because there's quite a lot of communities once you get out 5 miles from that island. That's it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point and something that we're gonna, as a committee, have to examine very closely. So thank you for that. I'll let that be the last comment from the committee. And then Tucker, I wanted to open it up to public comment. I think you have the list. So who's first?
I do. So Joe Corcoran is first. I'll go ahead and mute him. Looks like he's already unmuted.
Hey,
Joe.
yeah, I'm here.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So about the amount of the CBA, like we put together at our community at our conservation committee meeting last night in Baltimore Borough Club. We're heavily invested in the environment and the biodiversity and conserving plants, animals, and wildlife, not just birds. And we're not just about birding, we're about conservation, which is really important. It's not just a bird watching club. The second thing is about the money. We did not know how much money we're talking about. So in my memorandum, or our memorandum that we sent to you guys, there's a whole lot of stuff in there because we don't know how much money we're going to be getting. Is it 10 million? Is it 100 million? Is it 120 million? And we don't necessarily know how to determine how much each of these things are going to cost. So we actually advised in getting a person to a habitat design consultant to work on some of this stuff. Anyway, but the other thing I wanted to talk about, you're talking about how this CBA money is coming up with, is the process of how the CBA money come up with. Is that going to have any visibility to the public as to how you guys come up with that? I mean, it seems to me it's like TPA is going to say how much it's going to cost to go to Hart-Miller, how much is going to go anywhere else, and then is the difference going to be what's in the CBA? Or how much is going to be go to the CBA? What's the process? And can we have some sight into that process? So that's just my question for maybe talking about it later or whatever, but that's my comments.
Thanks, Joe, for that. And I think to at least provide somewhat of an answer to that question. I mean, I think obviously, like, it's hard to do an agreement without a number and kind of a payment schedule, and that's going to obviously have to be factored into this. I think in terms of arriving at that number, the first step is, there has to be an understanding of the cost to place, and so that's kind of the variable that we're waiting for right now before that discussion can really pick up in full force. So that it's not a full answer, but that is kind of where we are right now. And Joe, the other thing I wanted to let you know is we did get your proposal earlier today, which actually I appreciate how thoughtful and thorough it was. Certainly stuff that we can factor in as we start to put together a draft agreement. So I think that's going to be very useful for us. And then, just in terms of kind of how this might look, I think we need to gather up, the concepts that we want contemplated in the agreement, and address items like payment and payment schedule. In terms of assessing project by project costs, that's probably not realistic to do before the end of the year. And so we're going to have something in the agreement that contemplates further analysis in terms of like fleshing out project by project costs that are, of things that are contemplated in the agreement. So that's the last thing I'll add to that. Tucker, who else do we have?
Next up is Kathy Lambro. And just as a reminder, to try to stay close to schedule, we're asking folks to keep their remarks to 90 seconds. And I'll give people a reminder when we get there. So, Kathy, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I missed how many minutes I had, but I'll be quick. I think that what I've heard tonight, and it may be because there are other discussions that I'm not privy to, but I have a real concern because everything I've heard this evening has been talking about recreation opportunities on the island, and I've heard nothing about preservation. I really appreciate Richard Ort's comments from DNR. This whole dredging of the channels, that just completely threw me. I had no idea that was in the bill. And I think that's important. I live on the water and I know what happens. I live on Hogpen Creek. But and it may be that the committee has just not gotten to the whole, wildlife preservation and environmental aspect, but I have not heard one comment about that this evening. So I'm hoping and really pleading that this committee takes that into account. I'd also be curious to know what the original plan was for Hart-Miller Island, because I think most of it, as Mr. Ort had said, it was meant to be a wildlife area with some recreation facilities. I heard talk of catering.
But watching the time here.
Okay, thank you. That's my point. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. Good to hear from you. Just to clarify on, kind of like the maintenance dredging component. So two things. One, it is in the legislation, and so that is kind of, I think, why that's been latched onto. The other thing I'd point out is, and we've gotten a lot of comments about kind of interest in, seeing, maintenance dredging to free up some recreational opportunities. It is something that should be considered and weighed thoroughly as we, work toward developing a community benefits agreement. We're at the beginning of this process, though, so it is an idea that we've heard from some of the community. Certainly valuable to understand if others aren't supportive of that. So I do appreciate the feedback. Aaron.
It's Samir, real quick, just to address her comment on the restoration. And I know that as we work with DNR on the placement strategy for Hart-Miller, there will be a habitat goal that will have to be reassessed before the closure. That's going to be part of like the closure of Hart-Miller Island. Once the material is placed, there's going to be a habitat plan on kind of what ultimately that material will be managed to, and what habitat that DNR would like to see. So that's kind of part of that. And there's an obligation from MPA still outstanding with DNR to do that. And I think that will all be factored in once we have the additional material and kind of what kind of habitat can we create with the new material. And I think DNR is I don't want to speak for you for DNR, but that's kind of what's contemplated as part of the conversation too. So
they're absolutely, I mean, not to talk to DNR or MES, but both entities are absolutely sensitized and goal oriented when it comes to restoration and habitat, Kathy. That's I think part of the plan.
Tucker?
Yep. Next up here is Russell Donnelly. And just a reminder, 90 seconds, I'll remind you of the time. So Russell, the floor is yours. You should be unmuted. Russell, are you there?
Yes. Hello.
Great. Yep. Go ahead.
Hello. Keeps muting out. Must be these phones. I sent in a post, a message to you. It went to all the committees supposedly. That issue of 2009, I was on, I don't know if you know or not, because you're younger in the field. I was on the first Hart-Miller Oversight Committee with the 14 original, I was one of the 14 original members when they were designing and constructing the dike. Reference Dave Bebo, Maryland Port. Now, the thing is, what they're not saying, I work closely all along with the entire operation, like I have for many other environmental projects. The thing is, in 2009, that wasn't accidental. They had already raised the dike by General Assembly twice. It was 25 feet the first time, and then it went up more. 2 other times they had to add to it. 2009 was the date it went to DRC for consideration. The open pond was because the leachate and whatever else was in the north cell. They were trying to balance the pH. That's why the water. It was a chemical thing. It's still not completed. It's not meant to be dumped in. That is now a registered state park for the state of Maryland, as per Secretary John Griffin and Governor Harry Hughes in that time frame. So this was all planned from the beginning with Maryland Port and the whole original dredging. And is that what you're planning to do and try to put into this place, there's a lot more to it. When you get to these federal levels and all, it's going to start to make sense. And when you see the analyses come back, I passed out in point of reference for the committee to consider.
90 seconds, just so you know.
Yeah. Consider is the 2011 Maryland Port Administration risk assessment. That's a level above all sampling being done right now. So please consider that. And at the end of the day, this needs a lot more closer scrutiny. And it's never been done in the nation or the state. And state and still in. Never. That's coast to coast.
Thank you, Russell.
Go ahead.
Yep. Next up is John Newcomb. John, I'm going to unmute you, and you're unmuted. And as a reminder, 90 seconds, and I'll remind you of the time.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
My name is John Newcomb, and for 3 years I have taken water samples at Hart-Miller Island and Bay Shore, the small island next to it. And all 3 years it failed due to bacteria. We should not be swimming in that water. Do you gentlemen believe dumping more toxic waste on Hart-Miller's Island is going to help that water quality? We were promised it would close. Keep your word and leave it closed. Don't put no more poison up here in the upper bay. Thank you.
Thank you, John. This is the last person we have signed up for public comment is Henry Hutton. So I'm going to unmute Henry.
Could you hear me?
Yes, sir. You are unmuted. You have 90 seconds. I'll remind you of the time. The floor is yours. Like you got muted.
Hey, hon.
There you go.
Did you hear me okay?
I can hear you, Henry.
Oh.
Henry, are you there?
Yield my time if you can't hear me.
Yeah, I've not started your time yet. I can hear you. You are unmuted.
just the agreement really should be short and sweet from my frame of reference. We got enough experts there to paint wide parameters. It's really about the dollar amount. Josh has a copy of a little document we put together. And the reality is that this is a public asset being used by a commercial operation. A couple of things you can look at real quick is what are the tipping fees? The actual MES cost for continuing this is minor compared to a value to trade point of somewhere between 80 and $180 million. Hopefully it doesn't sound outrageous to you because all you do is take a look at the document we prepared. That's all based on public information. Thank you. Oh, the last point was trust fund. I don't know how you guys are attempting to put this money together, but trust fund.
Thank you, Henry. That's all the sign up we have for public comment this evening.
All right, Tucker, thanks for that. Want to thank the members of the committee and our presenters for joining us. As a reminder, our committees are open to the public, which I think Mandy just posted in the chat. The schedule is posted on our Hart-Miller Island landing page, and stay tuned because we'll be adding the agenda, minutes, and presentations to the page as well. But thank you for coming. And I know TradePoint is also posting information on their page. So appreciate the feedback. Looking forward to continuing to do the work with all of you. So thank you so much. Have a good night.
Good night.